Now it's just.
I'd like to call the April 7th meeting of the Williamsburg City Council to order. Ms. Walton, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Newsom?
Here.
Mr. Pond?
Here.
Mayor Holman?
Here.
Vice Mayor Fryling? Mr. Foster?
Here.
Vice Mayor Fryling is out of town on business today, so he's not with us today, but he will be on Thursday. Our first item of business today are items for City Council meeting of April 10th, a time when anyone can ask questions about issues that are coming before council at its Thursday meeting, as well as a time for anyone to address council on any matter they'd like to. Jack, is there anything in particular you'd like to say before we go to public comment?
No, sir, not at this point.
Okay. If there's anyone who wishes to address council either on a matter coming before council on Thursday or any other matter they would like, please come forward and state your name and address. Not seeing any, we'll come back to council preview for Thursday's meeting. Jack?
Yes, sir. The first item on the agenda is a presentation by Bill Unitas from the Historic Triangle Community Services Coalition to give us an update. So, Bill, you can go to the podium right there, and someplace we'll get your slides up here. There you go.
There you go.
Bill, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure to be here again. It's my annual visit to give you guys an update on what's going on at the community center and in the community. A little bit of a different approach this year. Rather than an annual review, I'm going to kind of talk about our 20 years of service. Back in 1994, a group of citizens got together and looked at this. Church was in trouble financially and bought the church and decided to invest in the church and in the community with a one-stop concept, with the support of both, or all three actually, Williamsburg, James City County, and York County, in support of the one-stop concept. But what that really means, like on a day like today, folks get off of the bus right next to our building, the side doors, 15 feet away. They walk in the building for food, clothing, shelter, or jobs. They can actually talk to a couple attorneys, recent William & Mary graduates, law graduates, about immigration issues. They can go down to the rides program and get medical rides for services. Go to the Community Action Agency and get some financial help, counseling on budgeting, that type of thing. We have a family redirection unit in there that does substance abuse for teenagers and young adults. So when you get off the bus, in essence, you can walk the halls and not have to go out in the rain to take a look at and find other services in the community. And that was the intent of the building. It has been for 20 years and will continue to be. So we are celebrating our 20 years of service. 20 years ago, some folks such as Alex Curris, Don Messmer, Sheldon Frank, and other community citizens got together and formed a group and created a community services coalition, of which I am now the current president of that nonprofit organization. We are out on Waller Mill Road on the way down from Kmart. We tell everybody. Dennis Welch is our building manager. He works part-time for us, 20 hours a week, mostly mornings. And I am the president of the board. We'll talk about our board in a little bit. Our mission really is to offer a low-cost, accessible environment, as I said, a one-stop concept. Our rent basically in the building is, hopefully we think, is the lowest in the community for facilities, for nonprofits. Most of the buildings, most of the people in there, the 9 agencies that are in there are nonprofits. It's equivalent to about $9 a square foot, excluding utilities. We include the utilities. We're about $11, $11.50 per square foot. Fish is in our building, which is obviously the most popular place. We get in the building about 20 households come into our building every day looking for food. Food, clothing, some shelter, and some jobs. So we refer them down to Fish. Fish by itself has about 250 volunteers. They've got an amazing organization for a nonprofit, run really well by Billy Johnson, who's been there since day one, 20 years ago, helped build the building that they're in. And now president of Fish is Don Bucks. Don's a great guy to work with. Peninsula Aging is in our building. They just expanded into some new offices. They're expanding their services. I talked about the rides program. Rotary is in our building. They service all The peninsula, I think is about 160 or so, maybe it's more than that. Rotary clubs, Community Action Agency is in our building, along with Head Start program. They're off this week, and I miss those little 4 and 5-year-old kids, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. 70 of them come in our building every day, and it's a pleasure to see them. It's a lot of fun. I mentioned the Family Redirection Institute. They've been there almost a year and a half now. A lady who basically works with substance abuse and teenagers with ADHD issues and that type of thing. Primerica does some budgeting and financial counseling. And then again, I mentioned the 2 lawyers that we have, young ladies from William and Mary, who started an immigration service. They're down from D.C. Twice a month. The office is up in D.C. actually. So as I said, we were a church originally, and actually we do work in a very godly way in that building, as people do. We've hired an individual who runs our referral network, Pastor Ed Rose, and he does a great job for us. We service through the 9 agencies in the building about 30-plus people that come through our building or serviced in the house by the households through the agencies. Fish, as I mentioned, has 250 volunteers. Last year, they gave out equivalent of grocery bags. So they don't do meals, 150,000 meals last year. And when you have people coming in, and I'm more and more in the building as we work on our referral network in our office and try to expand our services, and you see people coming in, many people basically, in many different aspects and problems in life. I can remember one lady coming in who was like 1 week short of being eligible for every 4 weeks they can get food from Fish. And she was in there with a 6-year-old daughter, and it was for 3 weeks, and she was back. And basically wasn't eligible through Fish to get another 4 weeks of food. And, when she's crying in your office, and the 6-year-old child is there, and they're looking for food, there is no such thing as no. So I just called Billy. I said, Billy, we need a little extra service. And Billy took care of that. And that's the kind of things, that's our payment for us. When they walk down the hall and they say, thank you, God, and that makes us feel good and gives us our payment for the year. Rides program, this is an amazing number, 481,000 miles on 4 or 5 buses that they do, giving people rides for dialysis, into the doctor's office, that type of thing. That's run out by Peninsula Aging. The referral network we talked about, we opened up 5,200 households we expect this year, 12,500 individuals coming in, again, for food, clothing, shelter, and jobs. We're expanding more in the jobs area than we have been in the Head Start program. The most popular one, and you can think about the winner we just had, was our weatherization and insulation program that's done through Community Action Agency Family Services. Folks come in and didn't realize they could walk down the hallway and get help in repairing their house, getting the windows fixed, getting insulation, getting a new furnace, getting new air conditioning, whatever it might be. And we refer probably 5 to 6 people every day elsewhere in our building to go to one of the other 9 agencies for services. The needs in our community fall into 4 categories, as I said: food, clothing, shelter, and jobs. Food, obviously Fish. Ben's Gift is a great resource, has been a great resource. The Grove facility, the churches. There's actually a group out behind Centura Hospital called Erase in Need that does a great job out there. Pam Frazier, working through the school program. Clothing, again, through Fish and through Grove. People come in who are going to interview for a job, don't have the clothes to dress for an interview. Or get a job and doesn't have 2 or 3 changes of clothes. They come in, get a suit, or get a skirt, get a dress, that type of thing. So it's a great program. Shelter, there's 5 area motels that we work with. 2 come to mind, 2 that we most hear about, and I'll do this alphabetically for the people in the room. One is Knights Inn, and the other one is Pineapple Inn, the 2 that we work mostly with. Jobs, various agencies throughout. As you know, this is a networking town, and we basically try to network with the other agencies. We network with Colonial Williamsburg, College of William and Mary, some of the major organizations in town, places that employment agencies. And we're actually starting a labor pool. Folks that come in, we, and I'll show you in a minute, we actually hire people for our own work when they come in. If we have a job to do and they're out of work, we will hire them for a couple of days to put some cash in their pocket so they can put some bread on the table for their kids. Interesting enough, and it's one of the things that we're trying to address, is there is no database, no real good place to go to get services and find out what services can be obtained in the community. I'll give you an example, for instance. Bill Bean over at the college works for in the economic development area. There's a program going for veterans who are low-income and in need, and there's an opportunity to start a business. And Bill is driving himself nuts. We were able to help him. We were able to get 15 people into our building that we had on our database that were veterans who were low income, to have them come in, listen to the program that's being funded by the federal department, to give them 5 days of training and a counselor, a consultant for 6 months to help them get started in business. But he's having a hard time finding other places to go to host those kind of facilities and to get people in this program. So again, sharing and finding out where this information is one of the issues that we're going to address this year. It's not just the underserved. There's a couple examples there. We're more and more seniors. I think about the estimate is in 5 years, 30%, 25 to 30% of our population will be over 65. So there's a great need for that, and that's being done in our building basically by a Peninsula Aging Group. As I said, they just expanded and took over 3 more offices. This is an example of somebody who came in last December. His wife lost her job because the contract her employer had for working with autistic kids, they lost that contract. So she lost her job, and he was laid off from the college and maintenance job. So at Christmas time, he came in. Now, you know, it's pretty hard, think about it, to walk through a door and ask for help. You need to put food on the table, to ask somebody to give you some food, give you some clothing. It really takes a lot of courage to do that. And this gentleman came in because he had children who needed food. And we were able to, actually, he's a handyman. We had some work we needed done. We hired him for a couple of weeks at Christmas time, put some money in his pocket so his kids could have some Christmas presents, and he still continues to do work for us. In fact, was working yesterday afternoon in our building. Another one was a gated community couple. It's not just the underserved. There are people out there, regardless of where they live, who have issues and have lost their jobs. This family, these 2 people, he had some health issues. He lost his job. She was working retail, wasn't getting enough money. She was coming in food from fish, and we were able to turn her over to one of our counseling because she had some other issues she needed to address because of the stress she was under. So those are the types of things that we see every day in our building, and that's really what our building does. Service as a community has been for 20 years and will continue for another, hopefully, 50 years. As far as the clients that we serve in the building, you actually have a handout. I think Jerry handed some information out to you. The first page talks about all the different people that we deal with in the building, and then the last couple of pages is some history, some background, and the last page is this particular document here. City of Williamsburg, James City County, other areas, clients that were served 2012, 13, and 14. About 80% comes from James City County, about 20% comes from Williamsburg. We have a conference center. It is a community service facility. It is a great facility. We see anything and everything in that. We had actually a Thanksgiving dinner last year where 150 people from one family came in, because obviously there's no home big enough for 150 in a family. And I wanted to be invited to that one because I knew they were going to have some good food there anyways. But we do have a large facility, and we have multiple, and I think the next slide talks about that. Whoops. Well, this is just some pictures. The upper left is a job fair. We actually have 2 a year. The flea markets that we have, Ford's Colony has one. The crafts fair done by CW. This is one of the fanciest weddings we've ever had in our building. But we are the best deal in town for that. We trained, actually, on the upper left, we set that up for Martin's when they were basically training a bunch of new people that they were hiring. They trained about 200 people a day for 2 or 3 days. Conferences. This past weekend, we just had all the Rotary clubs in Saturday afternoon. And interesting enough, Symphonia comes in and practices because they like our acoustics in our building. So every week before they go out and you pay whatever it is to listen to them, we get to sneak in, listen to the practice. They welcome us, so we get our culture the easy way. Right? And they're in there about once a month during the season. The Conference Center, Sunday church services, Community Action Agency twice a year has legal counseling on a Saturday. They get some lawyers who volunteer. I talked about the craft shows, Fort College Yard Sale, birthdays. We see 80-year-old birthday parties, 90-year-old birthday parties. The oldest one we had is 104. And those are great events. A lot of weddings, a lot of receptions. Boy Scouts, we just had the Pinewood Derby. For those of you who have youngsters, Cub Scouts, Weeblos, we had the Pinewood Derby this a couple weeks ago. The Rotary Club just met. We have a flea market in there every month, and there's multiple day and evening community service meetings and training that does go on in the community. We have 6 classrooms. It says 5 in your hand up, but it's actually 6, and 5 is probably right because 2 of them are adjacent to each other. We have 50 offices. People don't realize that we have 50 offices in there. We right now have 7 empty offices that we're trying to fill, and that was as high as past summer, about 16 empty offices, and we were successful in filling those, and that's a major part of our revenue. Board of Directors, Harry Keys, our Secretary, Scott Garber's our Treasurer, our Board, David, Don, Jim Eisenhower, Kathy Sisson, Bob Taylor, and Peter Valentich, and we have some non-board members that we keep on who give us advice and counsel, and of course Dennis is our building manager. So, thank you for your time. Think about us today, past 20 years, and think about us for the next 20 years. I'll take any questions you all have.
Yeah. Bill, thank you again, and congratulations on 20 years
Thank you.
of service
Appreciate
to
it.
this community. It's been important. Scott, anything?
Nothing in particular, other than that I'm friends with the 2 girls who graduated from Ware Mary Law.
Right.
Come down every so often, and they're really appreciative of how welcoming you all have been, and glad to provide that service for the community.
Yeah, Laura and Lauren. I always get
Right.
mixed up. They're 2 young ladies. They kind of look alike. Well,
Yep.
not so much. One's a blonde and one isn't. But
Yeah.
Laura and Lauren. But they're smart young ladies. They do it. In fact, they were meeting with somebody when I left the building today.
Very good. Very
Yeah,
good.
they're great people. Yeah.
And 7 of 50 office spaces is pretty good ratio in this market. So,
Yeah.
congrats. That's
Yeah, we're happy with that.
job well done.
Full is better, but we're happy where we are. Sure. Yeah, thank you.
Full is always better. As I listen to you, Bill, it reminds me of one of the greatest attributes of our community is the people in it. And what we have in your building is kind of one of the greatest confluence of volunteers. And I think that's an invaluable resource that you provide in the building and all the services that go on in that building. And so thank you for managing that and making sure that that's available to the community. I've had the pleasure of being over there several times, dropping off food. My business does a food drive once a year, and we drop stuff off. And it's always a hotbed of activity going on, and it's a well-used, and the community needs it. So continue, and hopefully we can get some help to you.
Thank you, appreciate it. Yeah, we do have fun, especially at 9 o'clock when the kids come in and at 1 o'clock when they leave, because they walk in the halls and they're just waving and smiling and everything. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for coming, Bill.
Yes.
I had a couple of questions. One is, we've got the numbers on the back page of the handout you gave us. I'm assuming these are visits. Do you have unduplicated numbers?
Those are mostly unduplicated numbers. The fish numbers that says for fish, I think it's 2,100 or 3,000 or something like that. Those are unduplicated numbers. So those are individual households that come in. We do have people that come in month after month or 3 months or 6 months, and some people have been a year or two since they've come in. And seasonality has a big issue, has a lot to do with it. But most of those, frankly, are unduplicated numbers.
So 5,500 people from the city of Williamsburg?
Well, part of that is fish.
Uh-huh.
Probably, think about the numbers, probably about 2,000, 1,800 are unduplicated numbers out of fish. So that would be that part of it. And the other part is Community Action Agency, certainly the Peninsula Aging Group. I think there was 1,500 that are in the area, and about 300 of those are out of Williamsburg. So those are unduplicated.
So does this count the Head Start children?
Yeah, but the Head Start program's not a major program.
I know.
You know, there's 70 kids in there, so there's roughly 70 families. But there's probably another couple hundred parents or single parents who come in for other services in the community, through Head Start, through CAA. Yeah.
Thank you. I also had a question about the referral service.
Yes, ma'am.
United Way's been trying for years to do a referral service. Is this part of United Way, or is it a separate?
That's a good question. When United Way decided to move out last October, we felt there was a gap with them leaving the building, because people would come into the building and they would not be able to know what other agencies were in the building. Our responsibility as both owners of the building and landlords is to service the other 9 agencies. Frankly, not a lot of that was being done prior to United Way leaving. We do about, as I said, 5 to 6 every day, referring them within the building to one of the agencies, either the lawyers or weatherization program or rides. We're just finishing up basketball. We drafted some basketball coaches and a couple kids for Community Action Agency. So we feel that because of the need to, when people come in the building, mostly they come in for food, but at the same time, we tell them about all the other services. So they're quite surprised to find out they can do that, walk there.
Do you refer them out of the building?
Oh,
to
absolutely.
other-
We refer, we get probably 5 people looking for United Way coming into our building every day.
Sure.
It's kind of interesting because they have appointments with United Way, but they're still coming to our building. So we refer those obviously back to United Way. And we refer people directly to United Way and through the churches and to Avalon and some of the other agencies in town. Yes, ma'am, we do.
Okay.
Yep.
And I wanted to ask about the database you talked about, because that's another thing we've been trying to do for years. And I know the Health Foundation has been working on a database. Have you talked to them at all about what they're...
We haven't talked to them, but we will. Thank you for that input. We found that it's interesting in the community. There are some people who are willing to share, some people who aren't willing to share.
And there are some
and as you all know,
legal issues, too.
yeah, collaboration is a major concern that we have, being able to take and share information. But we find, for instance, in the jobs area, that's a hot topic every day that people come in looking, because they're underserved and need money because they don't have jobs.
Yeah.
Trying to get that pulled together, the different places in the community. I mean, you'll have a 3-week binder downstairs in the office downstairs that I came across kind of accidentally, not walking the building and not knowing what's in here. I came in and walked the building and found that. So now we have that. But we get emails from folks. We're on like the CW's list, college's list for distribution. I'm finding little pockets of information that people have access to jobs, but it's just not public. So getting that information pulled together. It's kind of like when people come in, what are you looking for? And here's a place you can go together. Like,
Right.
if people come in for housing, where do they go? Okay, as I said, there's 5 motels in town. There are some other apartments and agencies that provide that service, but nobody can really put their finger down on all 25 of them that's available in the community. It's not one database, and that's not hard to do. Talking to people and getting the information.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We will use what's called a decision tree analysis. If you want to Google decision tree sometime, it's basically what it is. You start up a trunk of a tree, and you branch out, and you look for the information down that branch. One of those branches, food, clothing, shelter, and jobs, has an answer out there, and that's what we're going to do.
Great.
Thank
Thank you.
Well, Bill, again, thank you very much for being
Appreciate it.
here, and you provide important services to our community, and we appreciate all you've done for these 20 years, and you know we're behind you, so thank you very much.
Appreciate your support. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Our next agenda item under background presentations and discussions is the fiscal year 2015 proposed budget. Jody?
Asked Jody if she'd go to the podium. We thought it might make it a little better to keep up with it all.
Good afternoon, Mayor Holman and members of City Council. Before you today for discussion and consideration is the city's proposed fiscal year 2015 budget. I've had the opportunity and pleasure to work with Mr. Tuttle and Mr. Sarah on this year's FY15 budget message. This afternoon, I'm going to review the highlights of the proposed budget that's included in the budget message. After I complete review of the budget message, I'm going to go sit back down, and that'll provide an opportunity then for council to ask us questions from the staff level, and then an opportunity for council to have discussion on the proposed budget. So starting in the beginning, looking at fiscal year 15, little revenue growth is anticipated for 15 as the city continues to tightly manage its spending and still provide high-quality service to citizens. Kind of get a better look of that graph. 6 years later, the city will continue to operate below fiscal year 2009. That operating budget in 2009 exceeded $34 million. And you can see that in this chart right here. Trends for fiscal year 15 budget include property tax revenue. We looked to see that to continue to improve and increase by 2.6%. Intergovernmental revenue is projected to increase by 4.9%. This is due to higher state sales tax for education and VDOT street maintenance payments. All other tax and fee revenue taken together, we project to be level with the fiscal year 14 budget. And general fund expenditures are expected to increase by 1.45% for next year. Included in the proposed budget is a fiduciary fund for the Quarter Path Community Development Authority. Fiscal year 2015 will be the first year a special assessment will be collected by the city for the Quarter Path CDA. This will be used to repay the public improvement bonds for the Quarter Path at Williamsburg development. The fiscal year 2015 general fund operating budget can be summarized by the following. Projected revenues of $33.5 million, up by 1.04%. Projected spending at $33.7 million, up by 1.45%. Revenues brought forward an amount of $230,000 to balance the general fund. This is for us. There is no recommended increase in tax rate, and the proposed budget includes the same number of full-time equivalent positions in the budget at 190 as we have in the current year budget. Looking at the utility budget, $6.4 million in operating revenues is projected for next year's budget, an increase of 1.4%. It's recommended a 3% water and sewer rate increase from $4.80 to $4.95 per 1,000 gallon beginning July 2014. And as you can see, included in the budget message is a chart of comparison from some of our other localities regionally as to where those water and sewer rates are for the current fiscal year comparison. New capital spending in the amount of $5.2 million and the general fund capital improvement plan is included, plus about $1.2 million for debt service, bringing projected total capital spending for FY15 to $6.4 million. Some of the new funding projects included in next year's CIP include York Street corridor improvements, planning for underground wiring projects at South Henry Street and York Street in the Quarter Path area, improvements both at Quarter Path Park and Waller Mill Park, rehabilitation of the parking terrace located in City Square. We've also included some additional money in the city's repaving program, essentially doubling what we're able to do next year because of additional VDOT revenue sharing funds. The combined total 5 funds, the general operating fund, the utility fund, sales tax capital fund, the public assistance fund, and the Quarter Path CDA fiduciary fund amounts to approximately $50.3 million. Now let's take a further look at the revenue projections. As I mentioned before, for fiscal year 2015 budget, we forecast general fund operating revenues of $33.5 million. It's a 1.04% increase. Looking at revenue projections into four broader categories. The first category is all property taxes, which make up about 39% of the city's budget, proposed to be $12.9 million, about a change of 2.6%. Other local taxes, which make up 42% of the city's budget, are proposed to be $14.2 million, about a 0.10% increase. Fees, charges, and miscellaneous, these things make up about 9% of the city's budget, estimated to be 2.9. We actually anticipate this area of revenue to decrease by about 5% for next fiscal year. And then looking at intergovernmental, 10% share part of the city's budget, look at funding at $3.3 million, an increase of 4.9% for next year. Looking at real estate taxes for next year, total anticipated value of real estate is anticipated to be $1.73 billion, an increase of 2.6%. When you look at residential and commercial, the residential is anticipated to be up about 3.8%, commercial about 0.3%. You'll see on the residential side, we think that the positive trends that we're seeing this year will continue to see next year in residential markets and rates. And the small gain from the commercial valuation comes from the commercial property improvements, primarily that we're seeing on 2nd Street. The 2015 proposed budget recommends continuing with the current rate of 57 cents per $100 for assessed value, generating about $9.6 million, and this is at a 98% collection rate. Personal property taxes, also known as the car tax, are currently at $3.50 per 100. There's some offset tax relief from the state with that. We recommend keeping the current rate at $3.50 per 100, which will yield about $2.6 million, an increase of about 4.5% next year. Other local taxes, and these would include things like customer utility taxes, franchise fees, business licenses, transient lodging, and prepared food, or what we call the room and meal tax, will generate about $14.2 million next year, about 0.1% over the current fiscal year. Room and meal tax collections for fiscal year 2015 are anticipated to total $9.5 million. Looking at room taxes totaling $3.1 million, a decrease of about 3% for the current fiscal year. Meal tax collections totaling $6.4, an increase, just a minor increase of 0.4%. The room tax estimate does not include the $2 surcharge destination tax we collect in the budget to support destination marketing. This is included as a separate line item in the budget, and we anticipate that revenue to be $1.3 million for next year's budget. Looking at user fee, charges, and miscellaneous, looking at this sort of broad category of revenue, we anticipate this area of revenue to decrease by 5%, providing about $2.9 million for next year's budget. The revenue decrease can be attributed to an almost 22% decrease that we anticipate for EMS recovery fees, less overall medical transports, more Medicaid transports, possible changes that we anticipate to Medicare and their reimbursements for transports, and implementation of the Affordable Care Act all play into the projections of reduced revenue for these fees. In addition, this particular category also includes the emergency services contribution provided by the College of William & Mary. We've budgeted $120,000 for that, as well as some new rental revenue for the Triangle building coming from the Jewish Mother restaurant anticipated to open this spring. There also will be some codes compliance fee additions that we'll see as new revenue in next year's budget as we implement the new stormwater management regulations. Looking at intergovernmental revenue from the Commonwealth, this is the revenue that we receive from the state support, whether it's for constitutional officers or various state grants, are estimated to be $3.3 million, an increase of 4.9%. The estimated sales tax for education of about $1 million is based on the State Department of Education's calculations, which is up almost 11%, due to continued growth in the school census and state sales tax receipts. We also expect to see some growth in our VDOT street maintenance funds, totaling $1.6 million next year. It's up almost 3% over the current budget year. So now that we've looked at revenues, let's look at expenditures. Proposed general fund operating expenditures for fiscal year 2015 total $33.7 million, as I mentioned, up 1.45% over the current adopted budget. Looking at expenditures into four large categories, the first is city departments. City departments make up about 53% share of the total budget. Estimated spending for fiscal year 2015 is $17.7 million, with just a little bit of a change of 0.9%. Constitutional officers and judicial make up 6% of the city's budget. Anticipated spending of $2.2 million, an increase of 1.4%. Education and library makes up 28% of the city's budget. $9.5 million of spending is in the proposed budget, an increase of 3.3%. And then outside agencies and funding those outside agencies is about 13% of the city's budget, with a proposed spending of $4.3 million, essentially level with the current fiscal year. Going a little deeper into some of the additional expenditures for the city. First, looking at service changes that are in the proposed budget. The first one would start in July 2014 with the residential recycling services. This is managed by VIPSA for the city. We'll convert to the biweekly wheeled cart service for city neighborhoods, and that would start in July. This change in service allows the city to budget about $53,000 less in the current in the proposed budget for next year. Also included in the proposed budget is additional funding in the amount of $5,000 for the Beautification Advisory Committee's Neighborhood Landscape Grant Program as well. Looking at staffing, as I mentioned earlier, the proposed budget does not include any new full-time positions added to next year's budget. I do want to point out that we will look to fill a position that's been funded in the utility fund budget, as well as put some additional part-time hours in the codes compliance budget next year to manage all the new federal stormwater management requirements that will go into effect next fiscal year. Included in the proposed budget is also a 1% allowance for merit pay increase for city employees, totaling $89,000 with benefits. This allowance would be apportioned to employees based on their performance as indicated by their annual performance review and as prescribed in the personnel manual. Taking a look at health insurance coverage, this is the third year the city has been with the Commonwealth's Local Choice Health Insurance Program administered by Anthem. The city received a renewal notice calling for a 0% increase in next year's health care premiums. It's recommended that the city and employee percentage split for the premium payment remain the same as it is in the current fiscal year. And we're very excited to hear that it's a 0% increase. Looking at VRS, the latest VRS biennial actuarial results for Williamsburg have increased the rates from 21.29% to 22.04%. The city share of that would be 17.04%, and the employee share would be 5%. We've also included, for your information, this chart that looks at total cost of benefits over sort of a 3-year average, total cost of salaries over a 3-year average, and a combination to kind of get a sense as salaries and benefits over the last 3 years. As you can see, when we look at the last 3-year average of the cost of benefits to the city, it's gone up by 7.6%. When we look at the blue line here, we can see the cost of salaries has actually gone down when you look at that 3-year average. And when you look at combining both, it's actually gone up almost 2%. What this tells us when we look at this information is that the personnel costs are not being driven by necessarily the salaries, it's the cost of the benefits, primarily VRS and health insurance, which are the big benefits that we provide. So this is information that we started looking at and will continue to collect and share with council for future budgets, but we thought it would be interesting to kind of look at it in that way. Okay. Now looking at outside agency funding, there are a number of issues regarding outside agency requests that need to be highlighted. First is funding for the schools. We expect the city's contribution to the schools to be $8.6 million, about a 3.48% increase. This is based on the superintendent's proposed budget, the current state and federal funding, as well as the current 5-year joint contract with James City County. The city school population for purposes of apportioning the cost between the city and the county for next year is 890 students, which totals 8.24% of the total students. The city's share of a possible 4th middle school and a new school administration building will be negotiated when the projects are approved per the current joint contract with James City County. Looking at the Williamsburg Regional Library, this is funded under an agreement with James City County and York County. The current contract calls for funding of operational costs based on a portion of circulation by residency. The city's contribution for fiscal year 15 is right at $830,000, about 15.9% of the circulation. Looking at the regional jail, the city's share of the Virginia Peninsula Regional Jail is expected to be $1.1 million level with funding for fiscal year 14. We have 3 primary agencies that provide health services to city residents, workers, and visitors. These are the Peninsula Health District, Old Town Medical Center, and Colonial Behavioral Health. Total recommended funding for fiscal year 2015 is $438,000, a slight increase of 0.9%. Looking at human services agencies, you heard from the city's Human Services Advisory Board at your first budget work session. The proposed for next year is about $70,000 to fund the requests that have come through the advisory board. This is actually a decrease of 5.1% from the current fiscal year. As discussed at your budget work session, there are 2 reasons for that decrease. One was it was recommended that the requests for information and referral services that are provided by the United Way, that they should be redirected towards the Emergency Food and Shelter Program funding, which is funded through FEMA funding the city receives. And it's also recommended that the city continue to fund Child Development Resources, or CDR, on a fee-for-service basis pending the renewal of a federal grant they received to provide services in the city, and that would be similar to what we're doing in the current fiscal year. Looking at community and economic development agencies, the first item is tourism promotion. The city has supported tourism promotion and advertising through the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, our premier destination driver, and the Greater Williamsburg Chamber and Tourism Alliance, which acts as the regional destination marketing organization. The Colonial Williamsburg Foundation has requested $1.3 million, which is level funding from the current fiscal year, to support their marketing media budget. The Greater Williamsburg Chamber and Tourism Alliance has requested $650,000 for city tourism promotion and business services, plus an additional $50,000 to support the development of an Arts Month major weekend event, and an additional $25,000 to implement a destination social media initiative. We recommend full funding of the Colonial Williamsburg request and level funding of the Greater Williamsburg and Chamber Tourism Alliance request at $650,000. And next year's budget also includes bringing forward a one-time tourism promotion contingency from capital fund reserves in the amount of $250,000 to be used for additional tourism marketing and or tourism initiatives for fiscal year 15. And this would be at council's discretion to use this contingency for those purposes. The proposed budget, as I mentioned earlier, also includes $1.3 million of that pass-through surcharge for $2 destination marketing efforts. So total recommended city tax dollars for tourism promotion in next year's proposed budget is $3.25 million. Looking at economic and community development, proposed in the 2015 budget is a one-time economic development contingency in the amount of $250,000 from capital fund reserves to be used for economic development incentives and projects. This would also be at council's discretion. As you heard at your earlier budget work session from the Williamsburg Arts Commission, they've once again reviewed and recommended funding for the arts. They've recommended local arts funding totaling $120,000, and it's recommended that the city fully fund its share of that, which is $55,000. Also, it's recommended that we continue to support and fund the Virginia Arts Festival at the level of $50,000 for Festival Williamsburg, which is now in its 10th season. And I know that Council has seen this graph before, but since we've talked about revenue projections and expenditures looking forward at next fiscal year, I thought it would be interesting just to show this graph again, because this gives you a 30-year historical perspectives on revenues, expenditures, and fund balance. So if you look here, it's just 1983 up to 2013. The green line showing the revenues, the red showing the expenditures, and then the blue showing the fund balance, and you can see the direct correlation between the expenditures and the fund balance for the last 30 years. In addition to the budget message, which gives the highlights of the proposed budget, also included in this year's budget is the final update of the City Council's goals, initiatives, and outcomes for the 2013-2014 biennium. There's also a section on performance metrics, which have detailed information by department and cost centers for the city. This section has been improved in this year's budget to really show a lot more of the data and information graphically. And just to give you an example, these are some of the new graphs that you're going to see in the performance metrics section. And Mr. Serra and his team in the finance department have worked very hard in putting all that additional information in there for council. We also have the budget summary section, which provides more precise information for all the funds that are included in the budget. We have the full capital improvement program, which has not only the recommendations for fiscal year 15 new funding projects, but also for planning purposes the next 4 years of capital improvement projects. And then there's also the budget guide, which provides lots of helpful background information on everything you see in the budget to help better understand the budget as presented. Okay. Looking at the next steps in the council's budget process, the formal budget hearing is scheduled to take place at your Thursday meeting on April 10th, as well as the formal presentation and request from the Williamsburg James City County Public Schools will take place at your Thursday meeting. If council would like, we can also have another budget work session for further discussion on the proposed budget, and right now we have that tentatively planned for April 14th, with adoption of the proposed fiscal year 15 planned for adoption at your May meeting, which is May 8th. That concludes my formal presentation of the budget message, and I'm happy with Mr. Tuttle's help and Mr. Serra's help to answer any questions that council may have.
Great.
Thank you.
Jody, thank you very much for a terrific presentation. And as we all know, budgets are team efforts, and I think we have a whole lot of people to thank for getting to this point. But we appreciate you sort of putting together the budget message and giving us this presentation. But Jack, you and your whole staff, and Phil and your staff, and department heads, and I think this is probably everyone in the city has had something to say in this process, and we really do appreciate it. And I particularly like the way the metrics are applied in here, and the updated presentation of those can give us even more information. So
Thank you.
Good job. With that, Scott?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. Jody mentioned an extra, that we're going to be putting $900,000 toward repaving. And I see here that Ironbound and Capital Landing each have $50,000 allocated for this year. Where's the rest going? Is that just into the regular paving schedule?
Ironbound and Capital, that $50,000 in the
Page
current year.
191.
Yeah. Let's go back to the full sheet on that. 55?
What page was that?
I've got 191 is where I am, but
E5 and E6.
E.
Yeah, it's easier to go to just the, right.
I see 50,000 is highlighted in yellow.
Right. I need to go back to the project sheet on that. And Phil, if you want to jump in, go ahead.
That's for preliminary planning, right, of these projects?
Right, yeah, both of these projects, what we did is, in both cases, we're simply showing some dollars there to allow us to move forward. We've been using Kimley Horn to develop more precise plans for both of those, particularly with the Ironbound Road, is if we need to move ahead sooner rather than later with redesign of the intersection where Long Hill Road comes in order to access the Spotswood site. We want to be able to go and get that work done immediately. By having funds appropriated, we can move ahead with that. And the same with taking Capitol Landing Road, Bypass Road intersection to the next level. So it allows us both of those projects to advance, and so that there's some money budgeted so we can keep them going.
gotcha.
Obviously, those amounts of money are not going to put anything on the ground, but
Right.
they allow us to keep moving forward.
Right. And I guess my question, in addition to that, would be, so that accounts for $100,000. The other $800,000 just goes to our regular repaving schedule?
Sure. Well, the $900,000 is all resurfacing.
Okay.
So effectively, we take typically we are able to put $450,000 in every year into resurfacing so that we can keep the streets resurfaced on about a 15-year cycle on average. But this time around, we never want to leave money on the table with revenue sharing money.
Right.
And so we decided, well, we'll use that as a match and go after additional state funds, because the state will allow us to do just plain old resurfacing with state funds. And so in this year, Dan Clayton and Aaron Small put in for a grant application to see if we can get state money. Now, it's not awarded yet, but that's the plan.
Gotcha.
And if we can, it allows us in that 1 year to double the amount.
Very good. Very good. And that's done on either by age basis or just or need basis?
Sure. The streets are all evaluated. It comes time to put out the bid document to determine, based on that age, condition, and use of the street, so that the money's put where it's going to be of most use.
Very good. And on this economic development contingency, that's a one-time $250,000? It's not
Right.
continuing?
It's because it's out of the capital fund. We haven't done that before. We haven't gone into the capital fund for this type of purpose, but it is effectively moving money out of your cash reserves, bringing it forward through the sales tax fund, and saying it can be available for these two purposes, both the two contingencies, but as Jody pointed out, both would need your concurrence. The council needs to say, yeah, we want to spend money out of it for those purposes.
Gotcha. And on the $50,000 for the Arts Month marquee event with the chamber, and their $25,000 for a social media budget, I know we talked about hopefully getting some more information, a little more flesh on that idea in the near term.
Right. So as it stands now, in effect, we have money identified that could go to that, but at this point, until the council says so, we won't yet tell the chamber that the money's there for them to use.
Right.
So
So moving forward, we can adopt as it's allocated, but continue that discussion. We don't have to know everything that will happen
Exactly.
in between now and May.
Because it is a contingency fund, though, further action has to take place. Council needs to say what you want to spend it on.
Very good.
And bringing it out of capital essentially says we're thinking about this as investment.
Correct.
So I think that's also the way to think about it.
And
So-
a one-time.
And a one-time.
Yeah.
And so I think, as you mentioned with the chamber, the Arts Month thing seems to me to be, looking for sort of what is a one-time thing we can do. The social media question I have is that more an ongoing thing? And how do we need to think about that? So that's why I think those discussions could be useful with the chamber.
Very good.
Yeah, Doug?
Thank you. Again, my compliments to staff for putting together a great deal of information in 418 pages. Just about anything anybody wanted to know about where their tax dollars are going are pretty much right here at your fingertips. So thank you for doing that, and hopefully we'll get a A+ on our rating this year for transparency. Jody, talk to me a little bit more about what, or whoever, you talk about early on the reserves being brought forward and what that means of $230,457. Is that essentially like bringing forward for tourism promotion, pulling money out of our savings and putting it in it?
That is the case. That's to balance the budget. But as council's aware, Mr. Sarah is always pretty conservative in his estimations, and so traditionally we haven't actually had to do that in past budgets. But looking forward to next year's projections.
How many past budgets have we done that in that $100,000-$300,000 range?
Probably 3 in the last 15 years. There's not many.
Well, actually, if I understand the question correctly, we've only had a few years where we have come in.
We've actually done, but in the budget process.
The budget,
almost
typically,
every-
we have some amount of reserves
Yes.
brought forward.
Virtually
Yes.
every year, we've had
In-
some
in
amount.
A few
brought forward.
hundred, 1, 2, 3.
But we've rarely had to do it.
Right.
Generally, what we find out is we've outperformed
That's right.
on the revenue side and outperformed on the expenses side,
Exactly.
essentially holding our expenses down. And so the gap is greater than what we budgeted for.
Right.
And I think that's probably prudent management. So it would stand to reason that if we decide, if it was not in the proposed budget for the one-time contingency of $250,000 for tourism promotion, that this budgeted line wouldn't be here. I'm not having a problem with that. I just want to make sure everybody's clear on that. I guess one of the questions I do have when we talk about the tourism dollars, and so I'm perfectly comfortable with pulling that forward for the Alliance, I think. Before I go to the next question, I think what I heard the other day from the organization, to me, reflected kind of a new thinking, a new attitude, and I think making that investment to ensure that we're not hamstringing the organization from doing what I believe new management there thinks is the potential is incumbent upon us, and so I'm encouraged by that. We talked about a decline in number of rooms, room revenue, and I just wonder if we shouldn't just go ahead and adjust the $2 tax. Right now, we got a budget of $1.3 million. I don't think we've seen that in 5 or 6 years, and based on what you're saying, we're not going to do that again. You might as well just pencil that back down to something achievable, unless we set it as a goal and then turn that back to the Alliance and Colonial Williamsburg to say, we've got it in our budget to hit $1.3 million, and we're going to hold you accountable to it. I'm okay with that too, but if we're not, then let's be realistic with that number. So maybe it's 100,000, maybe it should be 1.2. I don't know.
Last couple of years, we're almost at 1.3 in fiscal year 12 and 1.22 last year.
Right.
So, I mean, it's hovering close to 1.3. That's why we left the loans and pass-throughs.
Sure. Just in getting into some of the little little items. For example, in the CIP, I know we got some York Street improvements in line, and I think that's appropriate. One of the things that's always struck me is, as a big why invest in a new sidewalk that goes up Pocahontas Street, cuts behind towards the Quarter Path Rec Center, rather than just calling the sidewalk that goes down to the corner of Quarter Path and hanging right up Quarter Path, why that isn't adequate. And so, if we're looking for ways to save money, it would seem to me that that's probably not a priority. And I think, what do we have, $400,000 in York Street improvements going this year? And I don't know how much that extra sidewalk is, but if it's $20,000, it seems to me we could probably save that.
Well, it does go down Pocahontas, and then it actually ties into the parking lot.
Sure.
And then runs out to Quarter Path Road. So we could find out how much that piece is. The main reason that was done was because effectively it's a multi-use trail that allows kids on bikes, that sort of thing, that do not have to get in the bike lane in the street, from the neighborhood, from those neighborhoods to get all the way into the historic area on a separated bike lane. That was the purpose for that section. Because you're right, in the section on York Street directly as it approaches Quarter Path, you've got a bike lane and you also have an existing sidewalk. So in effect, we've got all the facilities there, but we don't have that separated. That was the thought, and that was the reason why.
Right. Eventually, whatever pedestrians coming up a Quarter Path to York Street is going to be on the road. So anyways, it just seems, so I guess I would appreciate maybe rethinking that and is that really a priority, and how much is that? It might only be $10,000, but if we're trying to make sure that we don't spend money that we don't need to, that might be a place for that. The other one, well, so part of going back to restate kind of a position that I've taken for years, and probably been quiet on the last couple of years, is some of the money that we spend for tourism promotion at all the money we spend at both the Alliance and Clone and Williamsburg. And I'm not asking for a decision to be made, but just want to restate my attitude is that money should be used in ways that it helps all the businesses in the city, particularly at the Alliance. And I think that when we do make investments there, there's a direct correlation to businesses, benefiting businesses that are outside of the city via the membership. And I don't know that we're doing our taxpayers a service by not making sure that, and I know Karen's looking into this, Ms. Reardon, new CEO, so I'm hoping that we'll hear something positive. But I just wanted to restate that. And then also I probably restate I think we ought to not fund the HTC. I think that conversations that happen at the HTC could easily happen at the Regional Issues Committee meeting. And so it's only $6,500, but that $6,500 in my mind can be spent in better ways than funding those meetings.
Okay, thanks. Judy?
Excuse me, I just have a comment and one question. The comment is, at almost every meeting, including this one, we say, isn't the staff wonderful? They've done a great job on this, they've done a great job on that, something great. I'm not sure 1% is enough when we keep saying they've done a great job. And I would like to somehow be able to do more than 1%, but I understand the realities of the situation too. So, and that's very nice on health insurance too. That's a really good thing. That helps us a lot. The question has to do with underground wiring, and I'll note that Mr. Shohan is here and has talked to all of us. The budget still shows 2nd Street as fiscal year 17-18.
Yeah, we've had some I've had conversations with Jack about the idea of as we look at that project underground wiring projects. We have two major projects, South Henry Street, which I think was on the docket when you were on city council, Mr. Johan. That's how long it's been there. And the 2nd Street. And while we have them in the budget sort of laid out for, what is it, 15 and 17.
15, 16 for South Henry, 17, 18 for Second.
My question to Jack was, could we bring those together and do them as one project, moving planning money for both to next fiscal year, with the idea that the timing of the engineering work and what have you can be uncertain, so that we essentially put the money for the two projects into those next two fiscal year CIPs. And I think we could move that forward a little bit, because I think, one, we can't put off the South Henry Street further, I think, but I think we also need to move forward that 2nd Street, because there is a lot of momentum occurring in that part of the city, and I think anything we can do to help that momentum keep going would be good. So I guess what I would like to see, if this is okay with council, is see if you and Phil could take a look at that and restructure that into looking at doing the planning in the next fiscal year for that as one project, and then the funding over the next 2 fiscal years, again, depending upon what will happen with the engineering. So what are your thoughts about that, Jack?
Well, I don't know any reason why it could not be done that way. So let us go back and work on it. And I'll also have a conversation with Mr. Clayton. He might be able to chat with Dominion just to make sure there's no capacity reason why they can't move forward in that time frame. But I don't see any reason why not.
Although the engineering on 2nd Street is going to be a bit more complicated than on Henry Street. So,
Right.
So in part, and sometimes they can do that very quickly, and other times
It
we've
seems
seen
to
them
take a long
time. So
But-
I think giving ourselves some flexibility in that would be useful.
Okay. We'll bring that back and suggest an amendment to your spreadsheet here and those detailed sheets.
And just to tag on to that, I think the item number 2 on that, the York Street, should come forward as part of maybe trifecta projects.
Right, we were suggesting that be sort of between those two initially,
Yeah.
but if we're going to do it, might as well package them all
right,
together and
yeah,
work on them
together.
as one big unit. Right.
Okay.
That's all.
Did you have, one question I had for you is about the change in recycling. And I know we've been communicating with neighborhoods, but could you give us an update on sort of how that's going? And I know there are some neighborhoods that are having concerns about that, and how are we dealing with that? I don't know, Jody, Jack, I don't know.
Okay. I know Mr. Clayton has been working, the multifamily neighborhoods are the places where you really have to look at their situation. So there's not much of an issue in single-family neighborhoods, but in multifamily, Mr. Clayton has worked with about 15 of them, and the way he's described it to me, he's about 13 of them are all worked out and settled. In some cases, that's individual containers per unit. In some cases, that's some common containers per number of units. In some cases, it's a single dumpster for the whole complex. So, and he's worked so now there are still 2 or perhaps 3 that the dialogue is still going on to find the best solution that works under the new VIPSA system. Because essentially, we have the VIPSA system, and now we have to make it work in every application in the city, and they're all a little different. So I feel like he's just about home, and we'll be ready to go on July 1.
Okay. Good. Thanks. We talked about the 250 being brought forward for tourism product and promotion, but there's also 250 for economic development and EDA projects. Could you, or maybe Michelle, talk to me a little bit about how you see that working?
You want to start, or you want me to start?
Well, I can tell you what the EDA has been
Sure.
preparing for since they learned from Vice Mayor Freiling that this was they are working on fine-tuning an actual incentives policy. And this is very common for localities that have funds set aside for incentives, and outlines why you would want to use them. That the private market, it should be to fill a gap. It shouldn't be to just subsidize the private market, and then outline the goals in terms of what's particular to the city of Williamsburg. And they will be reviewing a draft of that Wednesday, our meeting Wednesday. So they just wanted to be prepared to help y'all in any way as we move forward. Having said all that, incentives to be most effective are unique for every project, because some projects have a cash flow need, some have a more general financing need. So you don't want to hem yourself in too much, but that's standard practice in Virginia to have these broad policies so that you are following some guidelines and allowing yourself some flexibility.
So how do you see this working? Once those policies are in place, then a particular opportunity comes up, and then they would come to City Council with a request for the funding? Is that?
Right, well, that's still an unanswered question. So I know our sister localities allow their EDAs to work up to $100,000, and then above that, they come to their elected bodies. But we can do it however
So that's
council wants to do that.
That's to be decided.
Decided, okay. Thanks. That's helpful. I think that's all the questions I have.
Just wanted to go back. You had shown a chart, Jody, about the cost of the relative cost from employees' perspective, the healthcare, VRS, right, and the wage. Explain to me that the wage, how it declined. I know that we gave a 2% raise last year, and I assume that's because we've had some job reorganizations and some new people came in, maybe at a lesser salary.
Exactly right. So
Okay.
as people leave the organizations, hiring new people in the organization, you typically have some savings with those new employees making a lower amount as compared to employees leaving.
And that's why I just say, on that one, we did it strictly on actual dollars out in the year. It's not projected at all, just so we could see what actually happened over the last few years. That was the result we got.
Yeah, there's no question that the real hike has been in healthcare and VRS. You know, you look at healthcare costs over the last 10 years. I mean, it's phenomenally how much it's increased. And what is that? About 3.2 million? No, it's too high. What do we pay? $2 million?
In total, split between city and employee.
Right. Which is about $10,000 per employee, which is, it's astronomical. You almost want, and I know we can't because of the arrangement that we made, but gosh, couldn't we do better somehow in a private sector? I don't know, but then maybe we couldn't. But that's just, it's a lot of money.
It is the private sector, I'm afraid.
Well,
Exactly, and hopefully we're going to be facing relatively level fundings going into the future. And if VRS can fall in line with what's happened to healthcare this year, we'll have some breathing room that we haven't had in some times.
and I guess part of the reason it's so, it's one number to say it's $10,000 per person, but a lot of that's covering families. And it's probably a good plan, and would be fair to say that most of the employees take advantage of it versus taking advantage of a spouse's outside of the city.
Right, we're at about 75%, 70% utilization, 75%.
155 out of 190.
Wow.
Right, so most people do take advantage of it.
Good. Well, I'm glad they do.
One thing, just probably worth mentioning, we are raising the water rate, but still relatively of value compared to the surrounding
That's
locations.
Still a deal. We got a long way to go before it's not a deal on the peninsula, but and again, a lot of that is anticipating costs that are going to come down the line too. So we've been doing that for a number of years, but it's still it's still half or less than
It's a tough pill to swallow, there's no question. I think I calculated there was almost a 40% increase in water rates in the last 9 years.
Yeah.
And so, we've been pushing that pretty aggressively, and I know it's purposeful, it's not arbitrary. hopefully we can slow down maybe next year.
Well, and hopefully the regional agreement on stormwater. I mean, there's some things that are falling into place that give us hope. Any other questions on the budget? Okay, so we will have a budget hearing on Thursday. We'll also hear from the schools about their budget on Thursday. Is that right? Okay. Any other questions on the budget before we go on? Not. Our next agenda item is City Council communication. Anything at this point? Schedule of meetings, Jack?
Nothing in particular to point out, sort of the usual suspects.
That brings us to our final agenda item for the day, open forum, time when anyone who wishes to address council on any item may do so. If you wish to come forward and address council, please state your name and address. Not seeing anyone come forward. Any other business?
Closed session.
Yeah, we do have one, closed session, yeah, okay.
All righty.
Okay, why don't we take a 5-minute recess?
I'm gonna do
We'll-
I'm going to read read Paul's script here.
Oh, yes, you do. I'm sorry.
Can't you do it by heart?
No.
I was hoping. Thank you, Scott.
I move to go into closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing one personnel matter per subparagraph 1 concerning appointments, one property matter per subparagraph 3 regarding acquisition of property for public purposes, which discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect bargaining or negotiation strategy of the public body.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Ms. Walton, would you call the roll, please?
Aye.
Mr. Pond?
Aye.
Mayor Holman?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
We'll take a 5-minute recess and come back into closed session. Thank you all for being here. Bill, thank you.